Here we'll do another example of a regression line. We have a list of earnings and a list of dividends, and we'll try to see what sort of correlation that those have. We'll do this by doing a linear regression. So we'll select our numbers, go to Insert, and select a scatter graph. That's the last option. Underneath scatter graph, we pick the dots option. We can make a linear regression by right-clicking on one of these dots, say Add Trend Line, select Linear under the options, and display the equation and r². Excel gives us a regression line, y equals 0.0542x plus 0.9055. The r² is 0.0357. Now, let's try to interpret the slope. We can say that for each x, the y changes by whatever the slope says. The slope is 0.0542. Now, rather than saying the letter x here, we'll use the first row, the earnings, for our x. So we'll say for every dollar earned, the y will change by 0.0542. Now the y is the dividend. So we'll say the dividend will change by $0.0542. In other words, about 5.4 cents. Once again, we can try to make predictions based on this trend line that Excel gave us. We'll put a row for prediction. We'll say equals 0.0542 multiplied by x, but we can't type the letter x. Instead, we click on the earnings. And we'll add 0.9055. Press enter. This gives us our prediction. Use the black cross and find the prediction for all of our x values. Once again, we'll label prediction with y hat. The dividends themselves will be y, and the earnings are still x. Now we'll make a column for residuals. Now remember that our residuals are just y hat subtract y. We'll say equals, click the prediction y hat, subtract y. This will give us negative 30 cents here. Remember that the parentheses in Excel's money format mean negative money. We use the black cross, and we finish the list to find all the residuals. Let's also make a residual plot by selecting the earnings, that's X, hold down Control, select the residuals. Go to Insert and select the dots again. And so this is our residual plot. Now let's determine if the model is a good fit. First, let's look at our scatter with our trend line. Now if we have a look at our scatter, we see that the line doesn't go through any of the points at all. It goes close to a couple of them, but most of the points are completely different from the trend line. This means that this trend line is likely not a good fit. It also means that most of the predictions we made are probably not that reliable. If we look to our r² value, we actually see a number that's very close to 0, at 0.0357. That indicates a poor fit as well. If we look to our residual graphs, we see there are a few points that are near 0 on the residual graph, but a number of points that are completely different from what we expected based on our trend line. Based on this, we would say that our trend line is most likely not reliable. And it's likely not a good fit. Now we could also find r as well. Our r squared value was 0.0357. Therefore, the r value would be equal to square root of that number, 0.18894. Now remember, our slope was 0.0542. This is positive, so any correlation we have would be positive. But now, remember that if r is less than 0.3, we have a weak correlation. So our r value is considerably less than 0.3. So we would say there is a weak positive correlation between the earnings and the dividends. With an r value that far below 0.3, it's possible that there is no correlation at all. One could argue that there is no correlation at all, but if there is one, it's not a very strong one. So, the earnings and dividends don't appear to correspond that much in this case. This also means that most of our predictions are probably not very reliable, and we should regard them with a grain of salt.